Welcome to Addiction and Recovery Conversations with me, Brett Lovins, the host of this podcast and YouTube channel. So when I track back through the time that I was a quiet person who had not discovered their voice yet, who lived in the shame and stigma and secrecy of being in long-term recovery and not willing to share with anyone or very few besides inside of rooms where the word anonymous is on the door, there are a few things that happened along the way that made a big change for me, and one of them was the movie The Anonymous People. It's a documentary that I've recommended to many people. Even the trailer is cool. So if you don't have an hour and some change to watch the documentary, which I think you should, even the trailer's cool. So to have the filmmaker, Greg Williams, on my podcast is a really cool thing for me. Greg Williams has put out several very influential documentaries about addiction in our society and the promotion of the advocacy for these many times voiceless people. To meet up with Greg and then to be able to interview him like this is just awesome for me. And so I hope you'll enjoy the conversation, and I'll put a bunch of links down below too so you can find his work, which I recommend big time. All right, Greg Williams. It's super cool to be here with you. I've found over time that the best way to set up is to give my guest the opportunity to introduce themselves, with the understanding that most people that listen to this and watch this will not know who you are. I'd love to just open that up and let you introduce yourself, if that's cool.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
Thanks for having me, Brett. Greg Williams, first and foremost, I'm a person in recovery. For me, that means I haven't used alcohol or other drugs over 20 years. And I think the most important part of that story is I didn't always share that part of my story with other people, and I went on a journey and learned a meaning and a reason to including that as part of my journey and my story, and now it's become a hobby, a passion to help others harness their stories and harness their power of their recovery stories to transform lives for what is the leading cause of death in this country, and is the persistent cause of so much pain and so much heartache in so many families' lives. And so, recovery can give so much back. And so that's really what I do, is I try to empower others to tell their stories, and that's afforded me an opportunity to make a few films and do some event work and do some other advocacy work and some policy work and just try to help improve the situation for others the best that I can.
Yeah. I've heard you and others introduce themselves just like that, and as I understand it, that comes from Faces and Voices. Is that where that originates? This idea of I'm in long-term recovery. Can you teach me about that? Because I know very little, and I'd love to know what you know about how it is that you introduce yourself and why that is.
Yeah, it started back in early 2001, when an organization called Faces and Voices, or coalition, came together and studied the public perception of the word alcoholic or the word addict, and the way that often the way that I was given how to introduce myself and my connection to my chronic disease. And I was taught to introduce myself in my first years of my recovery as, I'm Greg W. I don't have a last name, and I'm an addict. And I wasn't aware that while that introduction provided purpose in a certain community, in a certain setting, in other settings, on a job interview with my congressional representatives, with a babysitter or a neighbor, or my kid's school teacher, that language, they have a perception that I'm still using, that I'm still actively drinking. And that's obviously not the way that I would introduce it. And the public perception around those words still persists as derogatory and criminal and all the words that we associate with those. And so essentially, through dehumanizing people, we've allowed, the public has allowed discrimination to occur for individuals in recovery or seeking recovery. And so what they figured out and understood is person first language helps to open hearts, open minds, and also helps to see people, see you as a person. And so reframing my recovery narrative with that language, that I'm a person, and allows for better understanding of where I come from and my story, and also it's just more accurate in terms of other people's perception of why I'm telling you about my journey with addiction.
Yeah. This resonates with me. So many things in what you just said. I'd love to dig into one of them. So I'm just going to tell on myself, even the word recovery was rough for me to hear. It's like many words and many vocabularies in this world that I've waded into. I've gotten real comfortable with it, but I'm always thinking about what it was like for me in order to potentially, make it possible for somebody that needs to hear something to hear it. And so I'm saying that up front so that the person who's tuned in here that might have snuck into the office to listen to this podcast that is charged by a word like that, it's a word. And what I'd love to do now, if you're cool with it, Greg, is to ask you kind of a question. What does the word recovery mean to you? What does that mean? Because I think that might help.
Yeah, I think it's meant a lot of different things to me, but I think the most important understanding, it's just been personal freedom, the ability to go on a journey of figure out who I am, what I like, what I don't like, what I can offer to the world, and without being hindered by chemicals and things that make me behave in ways that aren't who I am. And so recovery has really just really been a journey of empowerment for me. And so yeah, I think that's probably it. I mean, it's obviously when the student is ready, the teachers appear and willing to be, they're willing to be teachable and open, I think has, had tremendous opportunities for me in my life.
Yeah. Well, I'll just share, for me, and it's been a changing subject as well, this concept of recovery. And again, telling on myself, that used to really bother me that somebody would say that, but I'll just share with the audience that's listening. For me, it means that I'm figuring out how to, similar to you, how to navigate the world without being jacked up all the time. For a good chunk of my life, I was on drugs and alcohol always. And so you take that away, and how does one go to the movies? How does one, go to a Thanksgiving dinner? How does one attend a rock concert? And these are things that have gotten easier and more robust and rewarding over time for me. And one word I want to just pick out that you shared that really resonated with me is, I think you said freedom. I think you said the word freedom just now, Greg, and boy, I resonate with that one. Like the ability to be what I want to be, do what I want to do without, and you said hindrance, which I think is an excellent word, of drugs and alcohol. Anything you want to take a swing at in that?
No, I mean, it's just the opportunity to, be unencumbered, and I think, it's like this old thing. I think I started to took me in probably a year or two on the path or the journey of recovery to like wake up and, look in the mirror and like the person that was looking back. I think that's, just a real journey of self-esteem how do you build self-esteem and all of that. Yeah.
Well, I want to go back to something else you said near the beginning of this call too. You mentioned, that stigma or shame, kept you quiet in your early period of recovery. You referenced, you had your first name and your last initial, the words that were used were things like I'm an alcoholic or whatever. And that those are charged words in public. I'm curious how long, from when you got sober to when you decided, you know what, I'm going to change this up. I'm going to start to accelerate a movement of people who are willing to say, hey, I'm in recovery and be proud of it. Do you remember how long that was for you? And was there a certain time when you said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to change this up, or was it gradual? Do you remember?
Well, I never set out to do anything but tell other people's stories. So I don't know, a lot of people give me way too much, credit for spearheading certain components of their own transition. I see myself kind of as a storyteller and a filmmaker, and had an opportunity to film, the real fire starters in the space. And so what happened for me was I got invited to speak at a legislative breakfast in Hartford, is Connecticut, where I live, the capital. And I told my story on the dais, and I was 3 or 4 years into my recovery, and the Hartford Current reporter came over to me, which is the large paper in Connecticut, and this reporter says to me, can I tell your story? Can I write a story about you? And I was like, 20-year-old kid, 3 years in recovery, a young person in recovery, and can I write a story about you and for the paper? And I said, well, okay, but you can't use my last name. And she looked at me and she looked at the dais and she's like, you just testified on closed circuit television in your legislative building. Like, what do you mean I can't use your last name? And I was confused. I had no idea. Like, I'm like, it's like, and I didn't, break any traditions or do any of that. But, I was just very confused about what my role as a citizen was versus my role as a person in recovery. And so it's not, sitting on a dais in a legislative building was not what I did for my own personal recovery in 12-step rooms and things like that. And so this reporter writes this great story about me, probably still one of the nicer stories written about me. And the third line of the story is, Greg W. did not want to disclose the last name. And this mentor I had, Donna Alagata, she calls me up, and she was the one who had to organize the break. She's like, oh, this is a great story. I'm glad you shared your story. But I don't understand the 12 traditions or anonymity. Like, what do I read in that sentence? And I said, well, that I'm ashamed. And she said, well, is that why you're telling your story in the Hartford Current? I said, no, I mean, recovery is the best thing that ever happened to me. I said, but I'm going to college. I'm looking to go in the media world. Like, I can't be on Google. I can't do any of that kind of stuff. And she said something to me that changed my life. She said, if recovery is one of the most important things in your life and has given you what you're most proud about, if there's a door in your life that gets shut as a result of your own recovery in your past, that's a door you never wanted to open in your life. And it really empowered me to go on this journey and explore what that was about for me. Why was I confused? Why are other people confused about using their last name and using their civic responsibility? And I've been paying taxes for since I got into recovery, and don't totally love where my tax dollars go. And so what do other people who don't really love where their tax dollars go? You're not a billionaire. There's only a couple paths you can take, but one is to tell your story to those who could potentially change the trajectory of your tax dollars. So I went to this training and met these people who were doing this work. And I left that training fired up. And I was like, these guys, it was right when a film called How to Survive a Plague came out around the HIV/AIDS crisis in New York. And it was a great film. And I was like, these people are on the cusp of really carrying a similar message. I wanted to help tell their story. And so I started to pursue how I could add value to the movement that they were creating.
Well, this seems like a kind of a perfect segue into this. And the first film that I became aware, well, I didn't know who you were. I don't even remember how I became aware of this movie, Greg, but I think I'm 7 years sober when I saw The Anonymous People, and, the story that you just recounted about, why am I using, why isn't the last name okay? These things were curious to me and kind of troubling at simultaneously. And then I saw The Anonymous People, and the title is awesome as well. And I'm going to, again, tell you a short bit of my story. When I saw that movie, Greg, I'd been working in corporate America a while, and I'd navigated all the events and everything else quietly. Nobody knew. I always had a reason why I couldn't do this or that. And then I saw that movie, and I'm sure you've heard this 100 times. So pardon me while I tell you my experience with it. It was, the metaphor I like to use, I saw Rocky III, which was as a young kid. And when me and Brent came out of that movie, we're in the parking lot and we're, shadow boxing each other. I felt so inspired by that movie. It's a long time from that movie to when I started getting noisy myself. But in some ways, you, my friend, in that movie, at least in one individual's case, you succeeded in what you set out, what you just shared a moment ago about participating in a movement and a change through at least one person that sharing that with you right now. So I'd love to talk a little bit about The Anonymous People with you if you're right. Okay. So at some point you decide, I'm going to build this movie, or I'm going to start working on this movie, this documentary film. And you had to know some things going in, but you probably didn't know some things going in as well. And I'm curious how the evolution of that, first off, did you already have a storyboard all set up, or did you go in sort of wading your way into some of the historical film around the movement and the comparisons to the HIV movement? I mean, these things, was it a process of discovery as you made the film, or was it like, I know what I'm going to say and we're going to put this together? I'm super curious about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. No, I mean, I'm a fairly traditional documentary person who believes that the story of most documentaries are created in post, and to just go out. I mean, I set out to make a current event film about these people and what they were doing, and it wasn't until I sat down with people like William White and Station Murphy and Tom Hill, and these individuals who had just a depth of knowledge of the history of the advocacy movement, that I became interested in history. I mean, I didn't know who Marty Mann was when I set out to make The Anonymous People. And it was only through the journey of making the film that I was educated about our collective history of advocacy. And now in my life today, she's probably one of the most important facets of my life today, as I continue this journey of just fascination with how much of our history is important to us today. So yeah, no, it was totally a discovery process, and the idea of layering the context and the history and the components to set the foundation for the movement that was underfoot at that time, and is still underfoot, is came from the individuals I was speaking with and interviewing.
Well, it was super effective for me, and I know others. And so if somebody's going to make it this far in the film, or in this conversation, right now I happen to know it's on Amazon to rent, and as is some of your other work, Tipping the Pain Scale, which we may or may not get to. But even your trailer for that film is impactful, and I've shared both a lot of times, Greg. So you go through this discovery process. You find your way to these. Let me do it this way. I would love to hear, what do you think the overall theme of the anonymous people is? Because I've got a few, but I'm super curious. If you were to have to tell somebody, well, what's the theme of this documentary? What would you say to that?
I mean, ultimately, it's about reimagining a different approach. I think so many of us know about the problems, the devastation, the pain that addiction causes. And people just stop it. They got to hit their own bottom. They got to change it. We'll never stop the fentanyl coming in the country. We'll never lower the demand. Like, all of this stuff is, people are just kind of, ambivalent. Oh, the government will fix it, or this, yeah. And, nobody wades into the complexity of what the vision or the hope or the possibilities of what does a different approach look like. And so I really believe that was, the intention, the theme is to lay out a vision for possibilities.
What really struck me about the anonymous people, the film is this kind of robust pride for being in recovery, and that it's okay to say my whole last name, and it's okay to be interviewed or whatever else it is. As a matter of fact, and for whatever reason, subtly or overtly, that was elusive to me. Here you have all of these folks that are spelling out that this isn't brand new or anything, and that it's been going on a while. And that theme really rocked me. And I know it has others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you go into the history of the 12-step movement, and certainly in Alcoholics Anonymous, I mean, the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, I mean, they were out front and going into hospitals, going into to do this work, even in the 70s. And lots of articles. Marty Mann was flying around the country. Edward R. Murrow called her one of the 10 greatest living Americans in 1955. Like, this was celebrated. I mean, it's certainly allowed Betty Ford to do what she did, and this was there was a culture. I mean, this is 1976. Dick Van Dyke and Gary Moore and Don Newcomb and Mercedes McCambridge, standing up, talking about the recovery, and so there was a dramatic cultural shift that changed for people's understanding of what anonymity is and was supposed to be, and there's kind of two sides of it. One side is as a member of a 12-step group, no individual speaks on behalf of that group. That's kind of straightforward. At the level of press, radio, and films, I still to this day don't talk about my personal affiliation with any group. I don't speak on behalf of them. Like, that's kind of black and white with the Lovins tradition there and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think people get that. It's the spiritual component of the why. And I think that's the piece that a lot of people get hung up on. But that's the debate that we get into, which are people really, what if I go public and then I, you know, have a reoccurrence of use, and it's like, at that time when this film came out, I'd say, well, Lindsay Lohan's already out there on your behalf. So, I mean, America already knows, recovery doesn't work, right? Like it's like the idea that, you would add to that narrative. I think that the piece that people shy behind and they don't really unpack is the shame. It is the cultural, personal shame. People have a lot of shame. Society has a lot of shame around what happens to people who are addicted, and we don't talk about shame. And people makes people uncomfortable to talk about the shame. But when you put it in cultural context, like, yeah, there's a reason I was ashamed of my recovery, because I grew up in the 80s and the 90s when we incarcerated and public enemy number one was every, drug dealer, and that was me. And, as a white man of privilege, like I even felt that kind of stuff, knowing that those things didn't impact me as overtly as so many other populations. And so the shame is not the shame that people in recovery who entered recovery in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, the shame that they felt is not an accident. It was a cultural creation, based on how we reacted to drug use in this country, which, spilled over to people who used alcohol, which in turn changed the cultural understanding of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, and how people, oh, this is I make a spiritual choice to remain anonymous. Well, that's fine. But at the same time, I have a responsibility to have integrity and be part of my community and give back. And I'm taught that I need to give back. And so there's all these conflictual messages, which is, here's the issue that I care about most in my life, politically, socially, culturally, interpersonally. And yet you're telling me, because of the shame or this misinterpretation of what anonymity is, I should be quiet about the thing that I care most about and hide behind that. And I think that's the unpacking that we try to do a little bit in the anonymous people, and really dig into that duality. And just personally, it's, for my first 5-7 years of my recovery, I didn't tell anybody, and so it's like, here I am, active addiction, 16, 17, and I had the face for my parents, teachers, cops, and then I had the drug dealer, at the party, all of that, right? And I had two distinct personalities. Then I get into recovery, and now all of a sudden I have two distinct personalities. I have the student in college and the kid who's training at the media company, and all of that. And yet then I go hang out with people in recovery, and I'm, completely vulnerable, but I have to keep those two lives separate. And it wasn't until I started to understand these things that I was able to actually unite my own identity into a single human who could choose to share whatever parts of himself he wants to share without conflicting or getting in the way of anybody else's journey to recovery. And understanding the reason for sharing my story is not about fame or personal gain, but yet this injustice and this underlying belief that part of what held me back and what holds other people back is they don't see examples of people who've transformed their life. And if you never see examples, or you are not witness of the power of recovery, then all you see is what's continuing to enter your newsfeed about the depth, destruction, and pain of this illness.
uses the word hope just now. So I'd like to pause on that word for just a second, because that's a thread that runs through a lot of work in the recovery field, I think, and certainly through the filmmaking that I've seen you produce. And it's funny, in my home group meeting last night, that was the word we batted around, is this word hope. And what I heard you just now say is this framing of, if you don't have examples to look at of people in recovery, it makes it tricky. As I was sharing last night, we in Washington State, the Washington Recovery Alliance, actually Lauren's involved with the Washington Recovery Alliance, and she was in your movie or your documentary, the tipping the pain scale. And I'm an advisor for that group for recovery friendly workplaces. They did a Mariners game, recovery day. And, I'm sitting there in the stands with my sister, and I'm wearing my green shirt. It says recovery day at the Mariners. And I look around me and I see hundreds of people wearing this green shirt, and we're up in the corner. And I thought about myself looking up there and seeing that. And I shared this at the meeting. I probably would have looked to my friend on the left or right that was as interested in the alcohol as I was, and I probably would have badmouthed them. I probably would have said, overtly, but look at those do-gooders, blah, blah, blah. But there would have been a part of me, a small voice, that was aware of this condition and was uncomfortable with how the trajectory was going, that would have said, well, that's interesting. There's 300 or 400 people up in the stands at a Mariners game, a Major League Baseball game, that are wearing green shirts and that are having fun. And that's an example to what I think you just shared, that, wow. And it also is an example of the changing landscape of this movement, I think. I think we're entering more and more of this normalization of this, which I'm thrilled about. So I'd love to, anything around that it's just a different story that supports what you just shared, but it's really an important one, like to see people that are doing this recovery thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if the individual suffering themselves, I think it's most important for families. Like I'm not sitting here without my family intervening in my trajectory. So many others have family and loved ones who've lost hope or don't know about recovery or the example. So I think it's so important, not just to be an example as a community of here when you're ready or the opportunity, but that that the families see that people get better. And the first responders, my wife is an ER nurse, and it's, we're brutal to first responders and professionals, and they're on the front lines of addiction every day. And for them to see that something they do, 7 times a day with individuals, sufferings, an intervention that they make, or a call for help, or a system navigation thing could somebody could, that person could end up in the stands with a green shirt next year because they showed that person a little love, a little energy. And I think that's the most important part. And this is the missing gap with, like, I think so many people in the 12-step movement sit in the rooms and stay silent. They forget how they got to that room. Like, you don't just drive by a church and see a door and walk through the door. That's not how we get there. And it's a telephone game. It is a system, an EMT. It's a police officer. It's a judge. It's an emergency department. It's a healthcare worker. It's a treatment center. It is a mother, a spouse, a child, a father. I mean, that is how we find those those doors. And I think just there's been so much focus of like, I mean, that community would do anything for anybody who walked through that door. But why wouldn't we do anything for anybody who doesn't even know that door exists?
Yeah, it flummoxed me a bit. I knew nothing about all of the things in the world around this, because my world in recovery was, certain days a week at certain hours to these doors you just referred to. And it hasn't been until the last few years that I've learned about things like SAMHSA, or Washington Recovery Alliance, which I'm a big fan of here in the state. They've been around 10 years. I've been here the whole time in this state, and I know nothing about it. And as I've gotten more and more knowledgeable about these organizations and the things they're doing, it's like, well, this has been going on for a while, and there's a lot of people, heroes, that are doing some incredible work. And yet, if I ask my buddy or my friends, having breakfast, do you know about such and such? Of course they don't. I didn't. And so I think that this conversation that we're having, and this is a time in history, I hope, where we return to some of that stuff that you pointed out so beautifully in the Anonymous People. Return to that, and maybe set aside some of that, I guess, shame. You use the word shame, right? It's as good as any. And just to have people, wear the green shirt, be stoked to be up there the next year. And it's like, I'm that guy that was down there bad-mouthing this, and now I'm up here in the stands with my green shirt. And man, if there's not hope in that, I don't know.
And I think the other, and yeah, there is no, I mean, people get offended when we talk about shame. I'm not ashamed, and I'm not necessarily saying individuals in recovery are ashamed in themselves. It's the internalized shame that the community has for this issue that intersects with people's private shame or their private self-esteem around, they know the community is ashamed of people with addiction. So therefore they internalize some of that community shame. And even if they individually have pride about their own recovery, it takes courage to walk into that community shame. And I think this notion of being who you are and sharing your story. I mean, it's doing it with community helps, right? Like doing it with 300, 400 other people helps. And so people don't have to stand on their own island and combat that, but they can, because you'll march down the street or you'll stand up in the seventh inning and everybody in the stadium claps for you. I mean, when people are celebrating, this is the duality, right? Like we have people have, they don't love people with addiction or active addiction, and they don't like the behaviors associated with people with active addiction. But we culturally will celebrate people in recovery. And so when you stand up with green shirts and in Safeco Park, it's everybody claps, right? And it's just like somebody, it was Alzheimer's Day or breast cancer awareness day. It's we can all celebrate survivors, and I think embracing that survivor identity is more important than ever now. I mean, I look at the death and destruction around me with this issue, and I'm lucky to be alive. There's not a day that goes by that I don't acknowledge that fact.
Well, one of the other signposts in my journey to becoming somebody who's willing to recover out loud, I love that collection of words. Is some trainings that I took around from Brene Brown's Dare to Lead work, and her whole premise of that book is around this idea of shame and courage. And sounds like you, I spent a lot of years being quiet, and now I'm noisy, and most stuff feels pretty dang good, right? Especially when not for necessarily for the applause, because really at the end of the day, Greg, this is a very personal thing as well. If I decide to go back out, I will have hopefully built enough systems in place to slow me down to not do that. But at the end of the day, if I did, nobody could stop me. And so the more awareness that people have around this and bolster, the more likely that those mechanisms are in place, so that it's not something that is mysterious, so that it's not something that, requires people to, I don't know, judge from a distance without considering, well, somebody's in recovery here, somebody's ill here. How do we connect the two? And how do we potentially get people aware of these things? And I think some of the work that you've done in tipping the pain scale as well. Oh my God, what a film, dude. I mean, some of the stories you share in there, I think of Roz as one of them, how you humanize like people that are needing help. I'd love for you to take a spin at that one if you're willing, this humanization of people when it comes to this affliction.
Yeah, I mean, I've been blessed to work with an incredibly talented editor, director, storyteller, Jeff Riley, who's, I think, is one of the best feature film documentary editors, filmmakers in the country. He, he's got just an ability to create that empathy and find ways to make people feel things. If you ever laughed or cried or felt something at any of these films, it's really Jeff Riley and less Greg Williams. And so the truth of your answer is finding the right people, finding the right subjects to point the camera at is certainly something that I have a knack for. But in terms of the creation of the art and the creation of the tapestry, especially in tipping the pain scale, really is Jeff Riley and his talents coming out in tremendous ways. And so, these films that, I get called as the filmmaker or the producer or what have you, but it takes a village, and these films are really put together by lots of talented artistry, and so I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that the humanization is a team effort, and it's primarily just how do you approach the story, and I think oftentimes we try to sensationalize or we try to approach stories from a specific point of view, but the things that people are doing in tipping the pain scale is sensational. The kind of work that Roz does in Kensington and Marty Walsh was doing in Boston, and the Josh De La Rosa, the officer, and Lauren Davis and in Washington State, and the kind of work that takes a lot of courage to do. It is painting that tapestry together to kind of show people you don't need to be Darren Waller and be able to break the Raiders record. You can affect change in different layers of society, and I think that's kind of the overarching message and story of tipping the pain scale is like, this is a multi-layered effort, and it's going to take a lot to solve this. But if people start engaging at the levels of society that they feel like they can, we can affect a lot of change and community by community.
Yeah, it's well said. I love tipping the pain scale. You mentioned NFL player who's in it, so and you mentioned the officer who cuts hair for people, and his police officer duds. I mean, these are just remarkable. They're sensational stories, Greg, and yeah, you and Jeff have a knack for making people feel things, including me and my wife, who's sitting next to me and crying, who had a front row seat for my acceleration into oblivion and then the return to humanity. It's a big deal, dude. It's these stories that you found and have highlighted in tipping the pain scale are just fabulous, and I can't recommend it enough for those that are interested. And they're stitched together in such a way, to your point, story wise, that they're actually really quite fun to listen to, as opposed to I don't know, some of the speaker things that you see, some of the webinars that are just bop, 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 all meaningful stuff, but there's something about that storytelling with the B-roll and all that stuff. It's just sweet, man. You've got a knack for it.
Yeah. Well, Jeff's won a couple Emmys. He deserves a couple Emmys for some of the work we've done together. But he is a talented human.
Well, we're approaching the top here, so I just love to just kind of aim for the ending here, the landing, if you will. I just publicly here on this, just to say how grateful I am for the work you've done, how it's affected me personally. And I'd love to give you the opportunity to share anything that you'd like to as we close out this episode together.
Well, thanks for doing this work and really appreciate it and appreciate, sharing these stories is hard work. Distributing and getting these films out there is far harder than making the films, which is saying a lot. It is not easy these days. And so it is all word of mouth. And I encourage others to share these films, with others. And as you said, they're all pretty accessible now, with small rental fees or whatever on the different Apple, Amazon. You can kind of rent them and get them. I think even some of them are on Tubi for free, and so you can find them with ads or whatever. You can certainly find the films if you look for them. And appreciate that, just continuing to share that. And we made Anonymous People. We premiered it 12 years ago now, and I'm just thrilled that I'm sitting here talking to you, and that film's still having some impact in people's lives. It's been beyond my wildest dreams, the idea that film would have some sort of lasting impact in people's lives. So thank you for sharing that. We don't often get to hear firsthand of the impact that stories we tell have in other people's lives. And so appreciate you and appreciate you sharing that.
Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Greg. Please, to anybody listening, please share, subscribe, all that normal stuff. Again, as a reminder, Greg's content is stellar when it comes to education and story blending. I'll name them off. The Anonymous People, and then Generation Found, which is about young people and the addiction crisis, as well as the most recent one, which is Tipping the Pain Scale, which is absolutely fabulous. All of them highly recommend. So check them out.